Hello everyone and welcome to the latest edition of Smith and Hesson. It should be Smith, Hesson and Drumm, of course, because Mike Hesson and myself joined by former international and current women's selector Emily Drumm. Happy New Year, Emily. Mike and I had a crack on the first of the month to get things underway for this new year, but you've been watching a lot of cricket, so what's been high on your agenda?
Well, you can't go past the just finished Indian-Australian third test match. It had everything in it for me. There's a lot to talk about as far as not only the result, but the certain parts of the game that sort of caught me a little bit off guard. A little bit of the sledging went a little bit too far for me, and Steve Smith, his sneaky little antics in terms of disturbing the batsman's batting mark was a little bit disappointing for me. But parking all that, don't want to give too much airtime to that. I just really enjoyed just the rearguard action of the Indians. That for me will stand out as the highlight. Really enjoyed. They took all the body blows, all the banter, all the talk, and they stood up at the end, and certainly against the odds, they've taken it down to the wire and get at the Gabba. Yeah,
I've got to say, Mike, staying on that subject, I really didn't expect them to hold out for, 4 sessions? And I thought at one point too, all the variables came back into play while Pant was at the crease. I thought India had a realistic chance. Tell us a wee bit about what you thought about the tactics of elevating him in the order and India's overall performance.
Yeah, I thought tactically it was very smart. I think they needed a left-hander and they needed a potential counter-attacking ability, and that's where Rishabh Pant came in. And I talk about the left-hander because there was a bit of reverse swing, so obviously that from the right armers actually took the ball away from him, so he was able to free his arms, whereas if they were to just recognise, just settle in on one length, they're obviously bringing the stumps into play and making it a bit challenging. So really smart move. Took him about 30 or 40 balls to get to 5, and then he just flicked a switch and thought, I'm in, I want to counter-attack. And then you're right, there was a period of time there after lunch where Australia were thinking, there's actually potentially 3 results possible here, which we never would have thought of. But I thought the Indian openers set the tone that night. I mean, a tough ask, you've got to bat 4 sessions. They got past 50, just stunted that initial onslaught. And then once again, 2 wickets after lunch on the last day. They were always missing Jadeja, even though he was padded up, he couldn't really bat. But the fact Ashwin and Vihari came out, and you're right, it was that determination, that ability to suck up some body blows and just blunt that Australian attack. But I thought they were a little bit one-dimensional, Smithy. I don't know. What did you think? You think they could have potentially changed a few things?
Yeah, they could have mixed and mingled a wee bit more, I think, just to chop and change it a wee bit. I think they perhaps brought Labuschagne in a wee bit too late in the piece. They might have tried something a little bit, even Steve Smith, something a little bit different to try and buy a mistake. By a period of relaxing from a batsman or someone who's prepared to take a lesser bowler on a wee bit more. Someone, like an Ashwin who I thought played really well as well. So I think they missed a little bit there. But I guess we should stay on the subject of their tactics and their captaincy. Tim Paine is now obsessed with technology. I think it's, and the way the umpires and the third umpire that are looking at it. I also believe that he's been called into question by match referees for what he's been saying on the field way too often. And this has not just been going on in this test match. 12 months ago at the MCG against New Zealand, he called into question not just the technology, but the people constructing the technology. And he was reprimanded over that as well. And that involved the New Zealand side. I just wonder whether Tim Paine is the right guy, because it's bizarre. His behaviour is bizarre. You cannot swear at an umpire. You just can't these days. And the worst part about it for me is that he's putting pressure on local officials. Now, he might know these guys, and he probably does know Paul Rifle and Paul Wilson, Blocker Wilson. In fact, he called him Blocker, I think, in the exchange. But the fact of the matter is, because of the COVID situation where the world is being forced to use local officials, local match referees, you should be actually on better behaviour. You're actually putting pressure on them. And as the captain of Australia, which is a tough job, it's full of pressure, and maybe it gets to people at times. I think we've seen it. But I just don't believe that he's doing the right thing by the officials either. And I think he's a lucky guy. For mine, he's lucky anyway, perhaps, that he's available for selection for this next test. That's my 5 cents worth, and I feel quite strongly about it.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you, as a captain of your country, your job is to uphold the spirit of the game. That's part of your brief. You have meetings before the start of the series around the standards that are acceptable, and they refer to the captain as the point of contact on the field in case it gets out of hand. Now, you're right. I mean, he's actually, because of his constant behaviour, that's actually filtering through the group in terms of they're very rarely accepting any decision as being correct, in terms of you start challenging everything. And he's done it when he's batted. He's obviously done it plenty of times in the field. And to be fair, he's actually got to get over it. He's got to get back to focusing on what his core job is.
Yeah. One word for me, respect. And just losing focus of what they have to do. Just play the game. Just play what's in front of you and just respect the decision no matter what. They make it. They're there for a reason, to be umpiring, make the call, move on, next ball, next over. Just get on with the game. They're certainly not going to win any Spirit of Cricket awards by the way that they're playing, but they're also going to alienate themselves. If you compare someone like Tim Paine to a Williamson, easy to compare it, just chalk and cheese for me.
And what influence does it have on Will Pucovski? What influence does it have on Marnus Labuschagne, who himself behaves like a bit of a fool on the field at times? I mean, his batting antics have been questioned by the likes of Shane Warne and Andrew Simons in a jocular sort of a way, but deep down, that's the way they feel, I'm sure. Now, what about him? He's lippy on the field as well. What kind of influence does he set? What kind of example does he set?
Well, they made a TV show about it, didn't they? About the turnaround of Australia's culture in cricket, in terms of they're still going to have that competitive nature, and of course, you're playing international sport, you're going to be competitive. But I think they've lost a lot of ground in this series, where they have in the past, where they focused on the game. As I said, they might make a clever comment or a sledge, but it's not abusive. Whereas at the moment, there's just inane comments and stuff happening, which is just not, is sort of what we've potentially got past, or told that they've got past that, because they wanted to get the respect of their country back. Once again, I just think they've got to get back to basics. What is their focus? You can play hard cricket without being pork chops on the field of play, eh?
I think you can. And on the subject of pork chops, let's not forget the guy who lost his job because of what happened in South Africa, Steve Smith. Lost his job, lost a lot of respect. And Emily, blow me down, at drinks yesterday, what do we see? Crazy.
It's just an act that I've never seen on the field. I'm sure you guys haven't seen anything like it, but there's TV cameras everywhere. He did it right in front of everyone to see, and he should be feeling really embarrassed about that, and he should actually come out and apologise for his choice of actions. And that wasn't an act of shadow batting or anything like that. It was just pure trying to ruffle the feathers, and poor old Pant, I mean, the guy was having the time of his life, and whether he knew it, luckily he took guard again, and he knew that something wasn't quite right.
I agree, and just to clarify that I don't have a problem with him perhaps as an advisor to his captain standing in the stance or in that area looking at rough parts on the pitch or areas of the pitch to aim at and advising strategy.
Absolutely.
Don't have a problem with that, but he cannot walk on that surface, point one, and he certainly does not own the batting crease anymore. He's had his turn. Yeah. He is out, and he certainly can't reline things with his spikes and that. I mean, it's dumb, but what brings you to... I've never heard of it. I've never seen it done before. What makes a man think of that?
I just don't know if it's a brain fade or what it is, whether he thinks he's not even going to bat again in the rest of the Test match. So I take your point, maybe looking at rough marks to be able to pass on some thoughts, or whether they go wide of the crease or some tactics. But it didn't look like that to me. It just looked like he was there for a purpose, and just to try and create a little bit of mayhem. Okay, well, let's look at, get away from the naughty stuff, the silly stuff, and get back to the tactical stuff. I thought Lyon had the opportunity on the SCG to bowl out India. For me, disappointing.
Flat as the wicket was. There wasn't the bite, there was no spit in the wicket, there was nothing that really caused any concern, I believe, for the Indians to worry about. The biggest challenge they had to deal with was the steepling bounce coming from the cricket bowlers, and even then they were tired, they were exhausted after 5 long days backing up, and again they're going to back up in 3 days. What's left in the tank? What's left mentally and physically? Are they going to be able to back that up? And I think Lyon will be disappointed. He didn't bowl badly. I mean, they pulled out the pitch maps where his grouping was beautiful in terms of where he's pitching the ball, but there just wasn't the the opportunities that he usually creates on the 5th day in Sydney. It was a bit disappointing.
Okay, so that was Australia's side of it. Let's look at what was a pretty heroic performance in the end from India, because they brought themselves back into the game, as we mentioned before, that possibility of actually winning it. You know, Ricky Ponting had a crack at Pujara. He wrote an article or made a statement to the effect that Cheteshwar Pujara was the problem that India have got. 6,000 test runs in 79 tests, averaging 48.22, and the hardest place in the order to bat for me is at 3. Ponting was brilliant at it himself. I'll give that as a forerunner. 1800s, 25 50s, 43 times to 50, which means his conversion rate is absolutely outstanding. So when he's in, he stays in. Man, I want him at batting at 3 for me. What's the problem here? He saved them a test match. He batted so much time in that test match. What's the problem here?
Well, they also made comments about his strike rate against spin. In the first innings, he got 30 off 35 balls against spin. So in terms of, so they need to sort of marry it up with some facts. I mean, Pujara, you can't have a whole team of Pujaras. Okay, I think we understand that. The game won't go anywhere. But for him to blunt that attack, for him to do what he did last series as well, where he was pretty much player of the series, and then come over here again and be able to bat for time. So he's got a lot of stroke players around him. I mean, you need players to complement each other. Sure, it would be good if he was able to hit Hazlewood on the up through the offside, but not many people can do that anyway.
No.
So it's a tough ask, and I think it's a big call to say that he's the problem. I think that you know, he's the rock. You know, Rahul Dravid, sure, maybe he was a little bit more expansive, but they played a similar role, and they had a lot of stroke players around them. So, and he played a huge part in that draw yesterday. I mean, he got them through the second new ball.
Punt can't play the way Punt played without someone at the other end
Spot on.
making sure that you're not in trouble at the other end. I mean, that gives you the licence to bat that way for longer. I just can't understand the criticism of it from my point of view. That was an outstanding performance. And Emily, later in the day, of course, we saw Vihari on one leg and Ravi Ashwin, of course, as well, who probably was fired up by some of the things being said to him just to stick in there a lot longer. They were outstanding. They couldn't break him down.
They were gutsy, and I love that about cricketers. When your back's against the walls, you've got to dig in for your team. I think Ashwin will be disappointed he got run out so cheaply in the first innings, where he was a little bit lazy running between wickets, and I think he wanted just to put in a good shift, give his side a chance, because he knew that Jadeja couldn't bat, and then they got a reasonably long tail, so he did the best he could, and I was hoping that there wasn't going to be another shocking run out, because the two of them couldn't really get any. It didn't matter about the runs in the end, but there could have been a little bit of a mishap, and Vihari, he was just a rock in the end.
Yeah, so I've worked with Ashwin before, and he's not one of those guys that you talk to, because he really just knuckles down. He's a hugely competitive guy, and you know people in every sport. There are some that you challenge, there's some you say nothing to, and then you give yourself the best chance. And I think Australia really mucked that up. He's not the bloke you want to try and take. No,
well, Vihari too was involved in that silly run out in the first inning. A brilliant run out, by the way, with Hazlewood's absolutely athletic throw from mid-off, which was superb. I mean, bowlers these days, they're not liabilities in the field, and if they are, they've got to work very hard on it. But which leads me to the next point now. Okay, so they're battered and bruised in India. They've lost Kohli, of course, for paternity reasons. Shami's gone home. Yadav is out. Vihari, of course, hamstrings don't come right in a short space. No. Yeah. Jadeja won't be available, I wouldn't have thought, with what he's got. So what are we looking at now? With what they've got left. Rahul still there?
No, KL Rahul's gone home as well.
Right.
He hurt his wrist, so he would have stepped in. So I think there's a couple of different things.
Sure.
Well, no, I think Mayank Agarwal, would be ahead of those, and whether Rohit Sharma potentially slots down to maybe 4 or 5. That's an option, or whether they bring in Saha. They might have to do both. Like if both those two are missing. I don't think, Kuldeep Yadav is the other spinner on tour. Once again, Jadeja played that role, though batting at 7, so Ashwin would have to move up to 7, and then your 8 to 11 are pretty light. So depends whether they want to go batting heavy at the Gabba and try and be able to score enough runs, and then just basically get Ashwin to bowl at one end. So I think that's the way they'll go. I don't think they can afford to play 5 bowlers without Jadeja.
Right, let's look at the World Test Championship, because that's the major focus now, and it involves Australia and India and New Zealand, of course, in terms of who's going to get those 2 spots. Percentage-wise, still New Zealand lie third, Mike, and they can now no longer do anything about improving that percentage, even though the number of points they've got is superior to Australia by quite some margin. So honestly, they can just sit back and wait. There's 2 series that could have bearing on those results.
Yeah, so England are going to India, which is part of the Test Championship, and I think everyone knows how difficult India is to tour. England would have come from Sri Lanka, so they would have had some experience in the subcontinent before going. So, you know, New Zealand will be hoping that England will be able to put up a bit of a fight there, and Australia to go to South Africa. And there's certainly got to be doubts over whether that series will take place based on the fact England's series got cut short, you know, within the last month. So that will certainly be a challenge. So, yeah, for New Zealand, they've done everything they can, haven't they? I mean, they're ranked #1 in the world, but in the Test Championship, you're right, they're sitting 3rd. And you're right, they can't do anything.
Okay, let's move on to the other great. I continue to call him a great find. Some people have even put him in New Zealand's greatest cricket team already, Kyle Jamieson. I'm sure he might end up that way if this record continues. Not quite there yet for me. But having said that, Emily, here's a bloke who couldn't have done much more in the last season and a half.
He finds ways to get wickets, especially when we're going deep into that last innings against Pakistan. The game was meandering along, and then next thing you know, he opened the floodgates, and then the boys brought it home. But he is certainly special, and he brings that element that Australia have always had, a tall, quick bowler. He's not express pace like Stark or anything like that, but it's a steepling bounce. He's always going to hurry the batsman and certainly get them fending in front of their face or chest, people behind the wickets are always going to be in business. So it's just so good to watch.
I'm looking forward to him bowling in India or Abu Dhabi or somewhere where it's going to be a little hotter, a little less grass to look at when you walk out in the morning, and just see if he can find the same sorts of levels of performance there, Mike. You know, I'm looking at his stature and the kind of bowler that he is. Will he succeed in those places?
Well, he's actually very skillful, is what I would say. I mean, 35 wickets, you know, in a season pretty much, averaging over 50 with the bat. It's a great start. But you're right, the true challenge for him and for him to grow his game is going to foreign conditions. So the one thing a lot of those tall guys do, though, is they do hit a length, and if it stays down, they can still be in the game. He's just got to be able to find that length. He's skillful enough to be able to swing the ball both ways. So in terms of developing reverse swing, you would think he would be able to find those skills. But yeah, being able to sustain spell after spell in that heat will be another challenge.
The big bash, Colin Munro, he's found some good form for the Perth Scorchers. In fact, in their revival, he's pretty much been their backbone. Yeah,
350s in a row. I mean, I've watched Colin bat a lot over the last 10 years. He's probably not at his most fluent best, to be brutally honest. And I think if he is, then he'll look really good. He probably got some confidence out of those 350s. I think he's injured himself now. There was an injury, a leg injury, so I don't know whether he'll be able to play the next match or not. Played some lovely shots against spin, which was impressive. But as I said, hasn't quite got that fluency against seam. So I'm sure the New Zealand selectors will be watching him with interest because there's a heck of a lot of competition now at the top of that order.
Well, you've been down to watch a bit of domestic cricket, you told me, just off air before, and a game involving Central Stags, and there's 2 names there which I'd be interested in your opinion. Doug Bracewell, is he forgotten to New Zealand cricket? Is he gone, point 1? And I do believe that you quite like the cut of Will Young in T20 cricket.
Yeah, I do. I think Doug Bracewell with the new ball has been exceptional. You know, he swung the new ball, he sort of got back to his best there. The challenge for him is his ability to contribute with the ball towards the back end and those changes of pace. But I've been impressed with his batting too. You know, he's coming in at 6 now, which is a good spot for him. I think it shows he's got the ability therefore to bat 7, maybe in a New Zealand T20 side. He's always had power against spin or if it's in the slot, but he's actually scoring off both feet. He's pulling it into the stands, he's hitting it down the ground. He's always been good over cover. He was in that squad or that series against Pakistan, but didn't get a run. Look, I think he's definitely should not be forgotten. We brought him back in 2 or 3 years ago after he had that horrific knee injury, and he was just getting back to his best again, and then he did another muscle strain. So I think he definitely needs to be considered. And Will Young, I mean, look, I think Will Young's best form is in white ball cricket, and he's obviously still in the Test squad, so he's a good player at Test cricket as well. But he is a wonderful ball striker, a very natural ball striker from ball 1, which is difficult, comes in at 3, often creates momentum rather than stalls the innings, hits all around the ground. To me, he's a complete white ball player, whether it be T20 or one days. So, I mean, once again, he's just another bloke who goes into the mix in that Black Caps lineup to try and fit quite a few into not too many places.
What's impressed you about the women's side of things domestically at home? Amy Satterthwaite has found some good form.
She's looked good actually, come back, and certainly the benefit of having a little break after the big bash, because that's quite tough, especially in that quarantined hotel over there. They're all in the same place. So having come back with little baby and Leo together, trying to work out how they're going to make it work on the domestic scene. So that's not always easy because you're travelling up and down the country. It's tough. So she's actually just walked in like she's never been away, which is nice because she's obviously off on maternity leave. So nice to see a player like that step back in and step up and show the young players that are coming through what the standard is. There's a bit of a gulf between our top White Ferns and that next tier down. So nice to see her leading the way, and the Magicians certainly need her to perform.
Okay, you're our selector. That's one of the reasons we've got you here. Obviously, so you're in the know. Give us some names that have impressed you. Some names that have really made you sit up and say, okay, we weren't that good in Australia, let's be fair. We shouldn't rest on our laurels. Do we start with a clean sheet of paper in terms of women's cricket, or are we've got that squad and that's as deep as we go?
Well, we've got a template for the player that we want to take us through to the World Cup next year. So we've got that template. Now, finding players that fit that template is our biggest challenge. There's a couple that have shined early on in the Halliburton-Johnson Shield. So Brooke Halliday, for me, has got her first 100 and started doing some really good things with the ball. Been injured a bit over the last 2 or 3 years, so her first full season back in, which has been really nice. So she's one player for me. Jacinda Savage has done really well for Canterbury. She's certainly led that side in terms of the bowling all-rounder position. We haven't had any of the White Ferns really come back in, so we've got no Susie Bates this year, so that's a big void there. A couple of players in that Auckland side that may come through. Bella Armstrong is starting to come back into a little bit of form, and there's just not enough coming out of that Central District side right now. They're struggling in the Super Smash. I really like Rosemary Mayer, but we seem to be picking up little niggly injuries, so some of the players need to work their way back in. So there's a couple of players that are starting to show a little bit of form. It's nice to see both the Kerr sisters back on New Zealand soil and showing what they can do as well.
Happy? Any other comments?
Well, I've got one.
Okay,
might
go
be
for
controversial. Frankie MacKay.
All right.
I've watched a bit of domestic cricket. I know she's, not the ankle injuries, not the best mover, but she hits the ball as well as anyone in the competition. Obviously bowling reasonably well. Is she considered, or is she deemed to be sort of over the hill, so to speak?
I have to be careful what I say here, Mike. You can't put me under that much pressure, but I'll be very upfront and just say, look, she's not in the immediate selection plans. Couple of reasons. One, fitness. Two, just not able to back up day after day, even though she does it for Canterbury. Huge step going on tour and making sure that you can actually do the workloads and the volume and travel and play for the White Ferns. And she's actually got to push out some of that top order. Sophie Devine, Amy Satterthwaite, Susie Bates, Katie Perkins, Katie Martin. There's a real core players there. However, never say never. Never rule anyone out. Never give anyone the complete black mark. But at this point in time, not pretty much in now.
It's quite good to actually have a bit of a dip at another selector, because I've had it for years. So it's actually quite fun.
Hopefully I've done the selection.
Yeah, you've done it well.
Answer okay.
Yeah, I don't think you got yourself in the crap, to be fair. Just finally, sledging and women's cricket. I mean, the Australian men's team, we've given them. Does it much happen on?
Yeah, it has
over
happened.
the years.
Yep, but we never had the TV coverage. We never had the mics. We were able to get away with it to a certain point. Luckily, I can say hand on heart, I was never in front of the match referee after a game.
I would just be thinking to myself that if you're going to have a crack, pick your moment, and pick someone that's not going to look at you down the track. And it's another thing for me about Tim Paine. No waiting for him in England, in India. Don't you worry about that. I think it's a good way to end, actually, because it's been the flavour of the moment. So thanks very much for your contribution this week. We'll see you again next week. And my final word goes to Tim Paine. Actually, you have got probably one of the hardest jobs in world cricket, captaining Australia. It's never easy, there's no doubt about it. But when you do it, just act like a grown-up. Wear that green hat or helmet very proudly and set a good example for not just your fellow players, but the kids watching on, because if you think you're breeding another group to come through and do the same sort of stuff, you're not doing the right thing. See you next week.